Thank you.
Welcome. And we'll, of course, start off with our bracha. We are about to perform the mitzvah of Talmud Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Amen.
And here is the text we were looking at. And you may recollect that yesterday we were in the middle of a Torah Temimah, which was based on this tradition that the names of the 12 spies were very much connected with their behavior subsequently. And Baruch Halevi Epstein started to discuss the fact that when they were given these names by their parents, of course, their parents had no idea that in fact their names and their subsequent behavior was going to be so well matched. And we discussed those issues. So he goes on to say, V'da, and you should realize, we need to realize, the afal pisha amar davar zeh mesoret b'yadenu me'avotenu. In other words, he, let's see who it was. Let's go back and see, right? Here, I guess it's in the, or in the previous page. Rabbi Yitzchak. Remember, he says, davar zeh mesoret b'yadenu me'avotenu. That's what he's quoting with right now. So it says, even though Rabbi Yossi says that, that is, it is something that has been passed on to us. It's in our hands, a tradition from our ancestors. V'hainu, that means to say, Kabbalah ish mipi ish. In other words, one person to the other, down the generations, one person would tell another. V'im kain, and if this was the case, ein hadavar tzarich ra'aya. We don't require any proof of this issue that the names and their behaviors were matching, right? We don't need to prove the point because it's a Kabbalah. And just if I may take sort of a side comment at this point, is that there's certain issues that seem to have been major issues in various times in history. And the issue of how reliable, in other words, in seeking the truth, what are the signposts of reliability? And it seems to me that at one point, and I don't know for how many years or centuries or whatever, the issue was tradition. How reliable is tradition to provide us with the truth? And of course, nowadays, we don't consider it that reliable, at least in most cultures that I'm aware of, or Western cultures don't seem to feel that that's a really reliable thing. But we can see that back in this particular culture, and certainly in a Torah culture, tradition is extremely important as a signpost of reliability. I guess nowadays it's science, and that's even not universally held. So a scientific method. B'chol zeh, nevertheless, even though it doesn't require proof, we don't have to prove it. We can rely on our tradition that this is in fact the case. He says, nevertheless, yesh lomar, one could argue, one could say, shedavar zeh merumaz b'parsha, that in fact, this note, right, about the names and their behavior is actually alluded to, suggested in the parsha itself. And here comes his proof. Ki inyan shmotam, because the issue of their names, ba kaful, it comes and is doubled. They mention it twice. But pasuk daled, so in verse 4, right, it says, ve'ele shmotam, it says, and these are their names, all right? And then, of course, what follows is their names. So like, duh, could we not figure that out? Okay, so maybe it's saying, well, these particular individuals, we want to mention their names. So, okay. Ubapasuk tetva or tetzayin, excuse me, but in verse 16, it goes on to say Elish Mota Anashim. It goes again and says, these are the names of the people. Well, we've just read their names. Why say it again? Velashon zeh b'pam hasheni, and this language, the second time, this mention, the second time, miyutar. It's not necessary. Okay, it's redundant. I love it, right? The Department of Redundancy Department. V'gam eino mevu'ar, And it's not so clear. It's not clear. Hemshech halashon, and this expression that is, this continuation of saying Elish mota anashim, and it goes on to say, the continuation of the verse. In other words, what is this verse that says these are the names of the people, and then it goes on to say, Vayikra Moshe lo Hoshea bin Nun Yoshua, and then right on it goes and says, and Moses called Hoshea bin Nun Yehoshua. He named him Yehoshua. What has that got to do with the previous phrase that we just mentioned? And for this reason, Yesh Lomar, you could say, Hakavana, that the intention here, the implication here is Elish Anashim. These were the names of the people that we just, detailed. Sheshmam Garam Lehem La'asot Ma'asehem Ara'im, okay, that their names, whose names caused them, had an influence on them or caused them to do the bad deeds, the wicked deeds, Bahotza'at Diba, when they spoke disparagingly about the land of Israel or their ability to conquer it, or they spoke disparagingly actually against God, because God was the one who said that God would make sure that they were successful. Ulama'an Hatzel et Hoshea mitakala zo, and in order to rescue Joshua from this trap, this impediment, Shina et Shmo, he changed his name, LeYehoshua, to Yehoshua, Lemor, with the intent of Ya Yoshiacha, Hashem should save you, Me'atzat Meraglim, from the advice of the spies. Ukafi hadrasha haba'ah, and as will be explained in the next drash he makes, which would be, of course, this one here, Vayikra Moshe lo Hoshea ben Nun, Hoshea, right? And then it says, Amar Ya Yoshiacha Me'atzat Meraglim. Okie doke. So just again, it's just, you come across these little statements and you just realize how insightful and thoughtful and brilliant this guy is in terms of what he sees and how he makes these connections. So we'll go on to where we left off in the text. I'm going to remove this. All right, so I think we need to go here. Let me make sure I got the right verse. Sorry about moving around. Here we go. Vayishlach otam Moshe, Moses sent them, latur et eretz Canaan, to spy out the land of Canaan. Vayomer alehem, and he said to them, Alu zeba Negev, go up here in the Negev, in the southern area, go this. Va'alitem et Har, and go up to the mountain, and we'll see if there's any Rashi on this. Yes, Alu zeba Negev. Hi haya hapsolet shel Eretz Yisrael. Oh, this is lovely. So Rashi says, the Negev, that's sort of desert, right? It is the psolet. It's not the, it's like the stuff that's left over, the residue, right, of the land of Israel. So in other words, it's like if you eat a peach, right? The nut would be the psolet, because you don't eat the nut of the peach. Shekain derech, and he says, because this is the way tatagarim of merchants, right? This is what merchants do. Mar'in et hapsolet, they first display the undesirable first, right? The less desirable first. The acharkach, and afterwards, mar'in et hashevach, and then they show you the great stuff. In other words, in order to whet your appetite, they start off with stuff that isn't quite so impressive. And by contrast, of course, when they show you the really beautiful stuff, you're much more likely to get excited about it. So similarly, you start off in the Negev, and then you wind up in the arable part of the land of Israel, and you see how amazing and fruitful and rich that soil is, etc., etc.
I can see that in this context, but um, for a merchant to show the bad stuff first, that's got to be cultural. I
Well, I don't know
certainly
if it's
would
the
never
bad
try
stuff,
and do that
Judith. I
as a
don't know if it's
merchant.
the bad stuff. It's the stuff that perhaps isn't, well, it's like, what can I say? It's like showing the seconds or the stuff that's cheaper,
Yeah,
maybe.
but I as a merchant would not
Uh,
do that.
okay,
So if you're saying this is typical of a merchant, it's
yeah,
got to be typical of a merchant in a certain context.
true. I would have to agree with you. Yes, yes.
I've definitely experienced that
Interesting.
recently, even.
Well, really, really. Well, I don't think, sadly, and I realize this about myself, is that unless you really know your stuff, you can wind up buying stuff that isn't that good. Instead of really getting the more you know about what you're purchasing, of course, the better position you are to make sure that what you're getting is top quality.
For
But
sure.
yeah, but not really knowing about quality, understanding the subtle distinctions. So
I don't
Research.
quite understand why it matters to, I mean, once you've seen the better stuff, you want the better stuff.
yes.
But what's the strategy of showing the worst first? I don't quite understand the psychology of that.
Oh, I think you want to start off not so great and ending with the patriotic finish, right? That
Why does that make you more likely to buy?
So the way it was presented to me was the improvements that you could pay more for. In other words, what we were buying was exercise equipment at a sporting goods store.
Mhm,
So
mhm.
they showed us the low end stuff. And Nick's trying it out and he's like, oh, it's not that comfortable. Well, if you want comfort and also this has this feature, you can pay this much more for this. And, um, then he's like, and so this is our top one is over here and that's got these features on it. So you just need to decide, what level you want and what, what you, so obviously you're going to want all those features because they're really optimal. So, I mean, you can also make a decision according to your purse, but, if you can buy either one, why wouldn't you want the optimal one? And it's kind of like, if you experience that right away, you don't know what you're comparing it to. You just like, they're all like this, you're gonna, but if you see, well, here's a cheaper one and, oh, this isn't that comfortable. It doesn't, and it doesn't allow me to use this feature in a way that I really prefer to use. And I could save money, but look at this one over there. That's, wow, that's got everything I want.
Uh-huh. In other words, you see the one that has some lacks and it's something lacking, and then you start thinking about, gee, I would want this if it had X, Y, and Z, and then you see, oh, this over here does have X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, so if the lacking one was the only thing available and it's cheaper and whatever, and you might just buy it, but you're like, oh, but and then if I go upgrade over here, I can have everything I want, and it's a one-time purchase anyway, and so it's $40 more, but this is for a lifetime, not $40 more a day. I'll get this one, sure, why not? It's just a psychological,
Yeah,
ploy, one of many.
right. I was going to say it's got to do with probably theory of merchandising.
Yeah, I'm sure they figured this out somehow, but I mean, I'm not sure about Rashi. Like, if they had seen the Negev and that was all there was to the whole land, it's just dry. Sorry, but this is your land.
Mhm. Not a lot growing there.
Maybe it's not a perfect analogy because, yeah, you're not looking to upgrade a different product. You're looking at a product that has both the so-called negative and so-called positive.
How about it going from this route? I'll take a different kind of approach in a way, right? Which is saying you start off with something that isn't quite so impressive. I mean, it's going to be your land, very nice. And then you see the Amek and the Galil and stuff like that, and you have an aha moment. And aha moments are pretty cool whenever you've had one of those. And you're more likely to have that aha moment if you move from something that puts you in one sort of emotional place and you go to something else that can change that emotional place. I was also thinking as we were talking about this, that, there really is a lot about I imagine, to the theory of merchandising, right? And the emotional relationship to the things that we acquire, and how you best approach a person if you want to sell them something, right? So, and sometimes in terms of value, how do you estimate the value of something? Well, a lot of it has to do with becoming educated. And part of knowledge has to do with the ability to make intelligent distinctions, to be
But
able.
you're right, that if you're kind of disappointed when you see something, but then you see the beauty and you get all excited, as
Right.
opposed to the other way around. Like, oh, this is wonderful. This house looks good. I'm looking for a house. Oh, geez, I didn't notice this and this and this. But if you see a few things and then you go in and it's like, oh, but this is gorgeous. We could deal with that. Just, it's the same information,
True.
but your brain is processing it in order in a way that it affects, how you feel about it.
I think you're right. And I think it also probably has to do with real estate. I mean, we've been looking at homes down here, right? And you see something at so much money, right? And then you go to something else and it's not that much more, but in terms of the amenities and stuff
Mhm.
like that, it's just so much better. Well, you're much more tempted to say, gee, I'd like to make an offer on that one. So with real estate, this is real estate we're talking about here.
Yep.
Anyway, just it's stuff to think about. Let's see if there's anything more. Right, no, that's it. That's it on the Rashi. We'll keep going. Or item et haaretz mahi. And you should see the land. What is it? Literally it means. In other words, I'm thinking at, the various qualities of the land. The et ha'am, hayoshev aleha, and the people that dwells upon it. Hechazakhu harafe. Is it strong or is it weak? So it could refer, more clearly it refers to the people living there, but it could also refer to the land itself and the territory. You know that depending on the nature of the territory, some territory is much more defensible than other territory. So Hama'athu imrav, this for sure, I believe, is referring to the people. Are they few in number or are they heavily populated? Are they many? And there's a Rashi on this. Et haaretz mahi. Scout out, see the nature of the land. What is this land? Yesh, and here, okay, so this is where Rashi takes it based on the Bamidbar Rabbah. Yesh eretz megadelet giburim. Interesting what he says. There is a land that, grows literally heroes, powerful people. In other words, the climate, the terrain, and the challenges involved there, where you're not going to be weak. You got to be tough to be able to live in that particular part of the land. The yesh eretz megadelet chalashim, but there's land which basically develops softies. So it's interesting how Rashi, based on Bamidbar Rabbah, is connecting the land and saying, of what nature is it? And what do we mean by saying of what nature? And its direct relationship to the population that they're going to have to challenge.
Well, that's interesting because if it's the opposite, like if you think that the people are strong, you might be afraid to fight them and take their land. But if you think the land is producing strong people, you might want that land so that your progenitors will be strong.
True. Yes.
Or whatever the opposite is.
Their descendants.
Yeah.
Yes, could be. I wouldn't discount that. Yeah, you're right. I mean, how you choose to process information is a very subjective thing very often. All right, let's see. Okay. Yesh megadelet uchlusin. There's the kind of land, territory that increases its population. It's such that the population is able, there's plenty to feed them, etc. And there's another kind of land where the population tends to decrease. People want to leave. Okay. Hachazek hu harafe, is it strong or is it weak? Siman masar lahem. This is again from the Big Barabba. He gave them a sign, that is, Moses gave them a sign to look for. Im befrazin yoshvim, if in fact they live in open cities, non-walled cities, chazakim hem, they must be tough, they must be strong, shesomchin al gevuratam, because they are relying on their own power, the im ba'arim betzurot, but if they live in fortified cities, heim yoshvim, they live, chalashim heim, they have to be weak because that's what they're relying on. So that's the Rafehu or Chazak.
Interpretation, the nuclear bomb is for weaklings.
That's right. Yeah, well, okay. Well, there's all kinds of weaknesses, aren't there? All right. Yeah, I didn't do this. I'm sorry. I don't think I actually translated this, right? No, sorry. No, we didn't do this verse at all. 19, right? Umaha aretz ashehu yoshev ba. And again, what is the nature of the land, the territory in which he dwells, that is, these people dwell? Hatovahi im ra'ah. Is it good or is it bad? Umahe arim ashehu yoshev bahen. And what about the cities in which he, in other words, it's talking about the it's using inhabitant in a plural sense, right? In which the inhabitant dwells. B'machanim, do they live in machanim? Machane is a camp, in other words, open cities. Im b'mivtzarim, or do they live in fortified cities? Umaha aretz, and what about the land itself? Hashmenahi im razah, is it rich or is it fat?
But there Rashi's on the other one.
On your TED as well? Okay, you're right.
Two Rashi's on your TED.
Good, thank you. B'machanim, right? Tirgumo b'patzchin, b'fatzchin. So he says, because machanim isn't so, as I said, it sounds like an encampment, something like that. And he says that the Onkelos, the translation is ptzachim, and that's krachin, petzuchin, upetuchin, me'ein choma. So Rashi explains, they are cities. Krach is a word for city. Petzuchim, it is, in other words, it's unwalled. It is unwalled and open, me'ein choma, or patzuach. I didn't look up the word. I don't know if, I'd have to look and see exactly how to translate that word. But petuchim means open, me'ein choma, from a lack of a wall, choma being a wall around a city.
Yeah, so just here, exposed, open, unwalled.
Okay, thank you. So I need to put in exposed. Let's put that in. So 1 second. Okay, thank you, Lauren. Oops, there we go. Hatovahi, is it good? So what do we mean? B'mayanot, we're talking about wells. In other words, we know how important water is. Tahomot, deep hatohomot, and their springs and deep wells, tovim uvriim, that are healthy. In other words, we know we can count on those water sources. Okay, so we read this. Hayesh. So we said, and the land, is it rich or is it poor? Literally, it means fat or poor or thin. Literally, hayesh ba'etz. Is it forested? Is there wood? Im ayin, or unforested? Vehit chazaktem, and you shall gird yourselves. Ulakachtem mipri haaretz, and take from the fruit of the land. And this is all that the instructions that Moses is giving them. And it concludes by saying, V'hayamim, and those particular days, the time when he sent them, Yemei Bechurei Anavim, it was the time of the first ripe grapes, the beginning of the grapes.
Two quick Rashis, and that's the end of the Levi Aliyah.
All right. Or up to the, okay. Hayesh ba'etz. Is there?
I mean, yeah, you're right.
Im yesh bahem. There we go. Look at this. Rashi takes eitz as a metaphor. He says, Im yesh bahem adam kasher. Do they have worthy people? Is there a worthy, it could be plural, even though it's in the singular. Do they have worthy people? Or it could be talking about their leader. You know, do they have a worthy leader, Sheyagin Alehem B'zchuto, who can protect them by, so we're going to take it as singular, by his merit. By the way, if you'll allow me a political aside, when our former president was elected, I turned to my wife and I said, he will make us weaker than we've ever been. That is part of what happens. Okay, so anyway.
One more Rashi.
Yes, thank God, right? Bikurei Anavim, right? The first ripe grapes. Yamim she ha-anavim, days in which the grapes mitbashlim bikur, I think is the word. I don't have the points here, but they ripen, mitbashlim, that the grapes mitbashlim, and I think, I don't know what it has in your translation, Lauren, but I would think to begin the ripening, begin there, ripen.
Yeah, it says the first stage of growth.
Yeah, okay, so bikur is then an agricultural term that means the first stage of growth. All right. Well, I wasn't leading you too up the garden path.
If the first stage of growth, if
Yeah.
there's
I
a
think
first
it's
stage
more
of
the
growth,
first-
I don't think it's ripening because
Yeah.
that's the last stage.
Right. I think it means the first of the fruits that become ripe.
So it says, what it says in Chabad, the season in which the grapes begin to ripen, comma, in their first stage of growth. So maybe not the beginning of their first stage, but as they transition into ripening.
Right, but there's no question that mitbashlim, when referred to fruit, has to do with ripening. That you can't get away from that.
Right.
Yeah, and also bikurim, the bikurim that you're supposed to bring to the
Yeah.
temple on Shavuot are ripe.
They're the first fruits, and bikurim are known as first fruits.
Right.
Like the Bechor is your firstborn son.
That's right.
The crop isn't all ripe yet, but
No.
these
Couple
are.
stages, right? It develops in stages. So
Yeah.
this is the first stage of ripening in their development. Yeah.
No,
Right.
no, no, that's two different things. We're talking about two different things now.
Okay, go ahead.
The first stage of ripening, let's say, I don't know, a cherry, it's small and green and hard and inedible. At the last stage, when some of the cherries are ripe, they're red and sweet and edible. So when you've got a few ripe cherries on your tree, those are the bikurim.
Well,
Right. Okay, I'm sorry if I said it differently, but that was my understanding. Okay,
yeah,
go ahead.
but it's just that you
I'm
said
sorry. Yeah. I
the
did
first
say-
stage of ripening, not the first stage of fruiting,
Yeah.
but the first stage of ripening.
The earliest, I
Certainly
would-
have at least some pink and not all hard and green and little,
Mhm.
yeah,
but
Right.
then there's no
No.
ripening
No,
happening.
no. Right. So yes. So it should have been using that verb fruiting is sort of an interesting, but certainly more descriptive of what we're talking about. Of being ripe, the first stage of being ripe, as opposed to the process of ripening. Yes. Right.
When it first,
you can gather some of it now because some of it is ripe.
yeah, when it first becomes a piece of fruit, it hasn't begun the ripening stage.
Like my first ripe tomatoes.
Yes, but first they're flowers, and then they're little hard green things, and they're fruit. They have fruited, but they haven't started the ripening stage.
But depending on whether you have a determinate plant or an indeterminate plant, and I prefer the indeterminate. Determinate, they all ripen at the same time. Indeterminate is they ripen in stages. they become ripened stages. So clearly there's a lot more to grape growing, tons more to it that I have no clue about. So I'm going to stop the recording and thank those who are participating.